So let me just welcome my guest. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for joining AFRAA SkyConnect today. In our show today, we would have two consultants from two different organizations in the aviation sector. We have Mr. Manish Raniga from Knighthood Global Consulting, and we have Vincent, who would be joining us from Lufthansa Consulting. Now, with the two, we would try to explore the aviation, the air transport sector. In particular, we would want to look at airlines and how African airlines are conducting their businesses today, whether we think what they're doing is of ultimate benefit to them, they're driving maximum returns out of it, or there are certain things that can be done better than they are being done today. Even though my guests are consultants, suffice it to say that they are not prescribing solutions for specific operators. We are looking at the aviation industry in general context, and that is where the point we will be approaching this discussion from. So whilst you pick up points that could help improve your businesses, if you want further guidance or consulting, they are available after the show, and you can reach out to them through the AFRAA channels so that they can give you specific advice on your airline and your operations. Now, note that, as always, you have the opportunity to also participate in the discussion by asking questions or making comments through the chat box or the Q&A tab. So please do make use of these even as we get into the discussions. So my guests, Manish and Vincent, you're most welcome to the show. Before I actually get you talking, I would appreciate if, starting with Manish, if you can introduce yourself and your organization briefly. Then after that, Vincent will do the same. Then we get into the discussion. Thank you, Manish.
Sure. Raphael, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here as part of the Africa SkyConnect Leadership Dialogue. My name is Manish Raniga. I've spent a couple of decades in aviation, only just a couple. I've held leadership roles across the Middle East in Etihad Airways, South Asia, Jet Airways, Go Air. I've spent quite a bit of time in Africa as well, with South African Airways, and also North America and Australia, across operations, commercial strategy, and transformation. I'm today a director of Knighthood Global, which is a specialty advisory firm in aviation, travel, and tourism, advising airlines, investors, and governments on restructuring, transformation, and some strategic transactions. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to participating as part of this discussion.
Thank you so much, Manish, for that introduction. So, Vincent, a brief introduction from your end as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Raphael, also for inviting me to this dialogue. So very excited to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Vincent. I'm from Lufthansa Consulting, based in Frankfurt, and I've joined the aviation industry 20 years ago in ground handling. And since then, I'm responsible for Lufthansa Consulting for our strategic and organizational topics and projects. But also at Lufthansa Consulting, we cover the whole value chain from maintenance to revenue management for airlines, but also airports and civil aviation authorities. And now very excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Vincent. So we just get started, the first issue I want us to handle is to look at the structure and arrangement of African airlines. You know, they are described as small, undercapitalized, very limited network, lack of collaboration, and operating in a very high-cost environment. Now, is this the calling of the environment in which they find themselves, or there's something fundamentally wrong with the way airlines are structured in Africa? I would want to start with Manish.
Sure. Look, I think I have a slightly different perspective of African carriers, and I often use the analogy of the little engine that could. And when you look at the importance of aviation, what that means in terms of fostering economic development, what that means in terms of transport, tourism, and driving industry, it's always been at the forefront of most nations, globally across the world, and particularly in Africa, where aviation has typically and traditionally been led by government and by sovereign, and that remains to be the case across the African continent. Of course, there's other parts of the world where aviation has evolved, has become privatized, functions more in a much more commercial nature, focused on profitability. But I think the importance of Africa as a whole and continuing to be an emerging economy and one that holds a lot of promise globally as well as the rest of the world look at Africa with curiosity. The focus of governments to invest in their national carrier, and to prescribe connectivity remains the fundamental strategy of what these airlines are, which is uniquely different to other parts of the market where airlines and the aviation ecosystem is geared towards profitability, is geared towards commercial outcomes for investors and for stakeholders. Really, for Africa, aviation is about nation building. Aviation is about really growing prosperity and economic growth, regardless of whatever carrier it is across whatever nation across Africa. Very, very different from the rest of the world, I would say.
Thank you so much. So Vincent, does that mean because of this centralized role of aviation in the African space, is that why we have so many airlines in Africa?
And sorry about the centralized what? I didn't get the complete question.
I'm saying that Vincent just, Manish just indicated that, look, aviation in Africa plays a very critical role in nation building as a strategic, it's more a strategic asset rather than a commercial mobility tool. So, and now the question I'm asking is, could that be the reason why we have so many airlines, even though most of them are not operating so well?
Yeah, I agree to this point. So we at Lufthansa Consulting get, I don't know, many requests per year from different states to support them with an airline startup, or they want to have at least the idea. But in the end, I think if every nation wants to set up its own airline in Africa and they are so badly financially funded, then they remain very small, have a low scalability, and of course, then this results in high cost, and then leads to a lower demand. If you have such high prices, can only operate on a such small scale. I fear this is when leads to further fragmented airlines and then also to more protectism between the nations. So I'm not sure whether, of course, I see this trend, and maybe for a single country it makes sense to set up their own airline, but overall for the continent, I believe more or less state interference would be good.
Thanks.
I think when you look at when you look at the landscape in Africa, and yes, there are a number of nations, there are plentiful in terms of airlines, all different models, private sector, sovereign backed as well. But when you look at the importance that each of them play, it's very unique in terms of both looking at how do you get more people into the skies, how do you democratize air travel, and particularly for those that are commercial operators that are non-government backed, there is this promise of Africa is the next big thing, large populations, upwardly mobile population, more people moving into the middle class, a very young population as well across the African continent, and then therefore this potential promise of, hey, aviation, provided that it's the right business model, that it serves the right network, that it could potentially be viable. And look, when you look at other geographies in the world. So I mean, India is a classic example of where you have the likes of Indigo Airlines and others, low cost carriers. The dynamics of India is also very similar to that of Africa. Young population, very, very fast growing middle class. People have, over time having more discretionary income, and connectivity becomes very important as well. Africa is obviously a lot more larger. It's made up of many, many countries, but that's, I suppose, the promise in terms of why we have a number of operators across the continent. Not to mention that is so geographically diverse that you would need to sort of have connectivity in different parts of the market, and whether an airline focuses intraconnectivity within a particular region or within a particular country, or whether they are a much more sort of global or regional, type of player or intercontinental player. I mean, it really depends on the business model, so to speak. But you know, I would say there's a reason and a rationale for the existence of airlines. Are all of them viable? No. Is can things improve? Yes, and I suppose that's why we're here to talk about what can be and what could be.
Mm. Yes. In fact, Manish, I understand I now get clearer the need for us to have many airlines, even though some of them are not very profitable. Now, but there's also another concern that many industry observers have, that many of these airlines have a mixed fleet, and mixed fleet of smaller numbers come with an overbearing cost, because there are no efficiencies there, because each set of fleet might need to come with its own set of crew. You must stock certain components, and so that there's some cost that comes in there that does not give the economies of scale that you expect. So how can we deal with a situation like that?
Mhm. It's an interesting one because it's a bit like trying to unscramble an egg when you inherently have a fleet and a network built up over years and decades, and have, complexity inherently built into your business, and then trying to sort of work backwards to try to solve for what does your future look like, which is, hey, simplified fleet structure, simplified network, getting the economies of scale, and the efficiencies across your fleet, across your crew, across training, and all those sorts of things as well. But really, the answer is neither either end of the extreme of mixed fleet doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad, and having a singular fleet doesn't necessarily mean that you're good either. It really depends fundamentally on the business model. What is your thesis? Who you're trying to serve? And fundamentally, it
Mm.
works backwards from, hey, it's really network first, and then network really then drives your fleet decisions of whether it's a singular fleet or whether it's a mixed fleet. And then there is the economics around, well, how do you then make that commercially viable? Your cost per seat, your revenue per seat, and then you sort of then get into the economics of how do you make it work. But inherently, what I've observed, both operating within Africa, but also from afar as well, is that there are a number of airlines that have ended up in a situation of significant complexity. Part of it has got to do with procurement decisions in the past, which may have been really good at the time. But then when you fast forward the clock, I mean, no
Mm.
one really has a crystal ball to say, hey, 10 years from now, hey, that was in hindsight, that was a really bad decision. But it was a decision that was made at the time. And so then trying to sort of solve backwards, I think there's, there are a number of carriers that are at an inflection point of how can you sort of look at simplicity over complexity and trying to serve many. And on the other hand, those that have
Mm.
simplicity, how can they add diversification to their portfolio by way of better networks, and therefore it may require different equipment and different level of operational complexity to be able to serve those markets sustainably and profitably as well.
That's right. Thank you. Now, Vincent, if I may come to you, it's good to grow your network and have efficient operations. But the way we have so many airlines on the continent, it also in some cases impact market access. Some of the airlines try to protect traffic for their local operator instead of allowing the market to be accessed by all operators on the continent. And we see the African Union now trying to step in and help us get a free market in place for the continent called the Single African Air Transport Market. Do you think this will be one way of actually unlocking the market potential for Africa?
Yeah, excellent question. I think SATAM has been in the discussion for many, many years now, and I think you have to work on two sides. First, to stimulate the demand, to, for example, to liberalize the visa regimes, which is now currently ongoing for at least in some parts of Africa, so that people can travel and want to travel between Africa or within Africa. And secondly, you have to work on the supply side. And there, I think the single sky could help. But you should, of course, as you mentioned, protectism comes automatically and, of course, makes sense for each single airline to have a clear deadline. Okay, you have 5 years to restructure your current state-owned airline, and then they are ready for the competition. But I think if you just open the markets now and you have not given the airlines time to prepare for the competition, they will fear they will lose, and then you will lose also the support of the local population, maybe the local governments. So I would make it in a staged approach, the liberalization, not to overrun everyone and then there's just one airline flying. And then that's also not good for the supply.
Yeah. But you mentioned stimulating demand. I mean, because the thinking in some circle has been that, look, the demand is growing naturally because GDPs of the countries are expanding. The middle class is growing, disposable income is getting bigger, and so that demand is there. How else do we stimulate demand for air travel?
As I mentioned, for example, the visa liberalization. So if you, for example, for European, it's easier to travel to an African country to get a visa than for an African. Then, of course, the demand cannot be that high, despite even a growing GDP. Maybe people prefer to have vacation somewhere else. And of course, for example, if this could be one step, or if you really make sure that the charges and fees which the government expose are maybe also lowered, or at least not growing anymore. So this could also, of course, stimulate demand.
It's an interesting point, Vincent, and particularly as you sort of mentioned about access to visas, and so I mean, on one hand, you can liberalize all of Africa and create one aviation market, a bit like the European Union and open skies. But if there's restrictive borders, if there's also infrastructure constraints as well, then there's really limited scope. But when you sort of take a step back and perhaps not look at it from the lens of an airline, but from a consumer perspective, what we're really trying to do is to offer consumer choice and connectivity by having that. And Europe is a fantastic example of both the height of competition, but also the opportunity that there's a reset of the market. Yes, there are winners and losers. Not everyone can potentially win and to compete, but there are opportunities for potential collaboration, consolidation, being one of them. But you also have a market that is intensely competitive, and it reaches a mature state where there can be an ecosystem of coexistence among a group of core carriers that are all profitable in their own right, and that are all viable. Africa would have to essentially go through that process. That we would, if open skies opens the door to one piece, but then that has to be then followed up through how can you then make it easier to travel, between countries, whether it's entry into visa, whether it's airport infrastructure, but ultimately it should lead way to a better competition to open up markets and to allow connectivity to take place. If that doesn't take place, then the price doesn't go down, and if the price doesn't go down, then you're not going to have as many travelers. And so there needs to be this democratization of travel in order to really capitalize on mass middle market in terms of, traveling across the continent and between borders.
Thanks, Manish. Now, if you look at the way African economies are structured, it would appear that we're seeing a lot of economic growth in many of the countries, if not all, at the moment. And this growth is projected to continue. The 20-year forecast by the African Development Bank indicates that African economies will continue to grow at a significant rates. Now, this we know obviously has implications for traffic growth. Vincent, in your traffic projections, what are you seeing for Africa, say in the next 10 or 20 years? What are the traffic prospects for passenger and cargo?
I mean, interesting question. So what we've seen so far that the typical projections, or I think everyone agrees that Africa has a huge potential, but in fact, some fails to unlock the potential fully. So there can be huge projections, and they are also based on the GDP. So you can easily say if the GDP grows, for example, by 1%, typically the passenger numbers are the double of the growth rates. But apparently this seems to be hard to unlock in Africa so far, looking at the past. So we believe here, as mentioned before, but also mentioned by Manish, I think was a good point, that the collaboration of airlines could help to unlock it. So for example, if they would work jointly together, if they have, for example, a mixed fleet in trainings, crew trainings, or maybe have some maintenance facilities together. Not every single airline at those scales can afford to operate their own hangars and MO facilities, but maybe together, if they pool the sources and collaborate a bit more across borders, they could make it more feasible.
Manish, what do you think? How do we unlock this potential? Because even today, we're talking about many airlines on the continent, but you would see that most of the traffic, particularly on the intercontinental routes, are not carried by African airlines and largely carried by non-African airlines. Now, how can we reorganize African air transport so that as the traffic grows, we actually become part of the beneficiaries, significant beneficiaries of that?
Yeah. Look, a slightly different view, Raphael, and without naming airlines, I mean, you do have some very significant and major airline groups across Africa that do serve internationally, that are competitive, that are part of also major alliances as well, and are punching above their weight. Does that mean that every carrier would have that opportunity? Well, the answer is no, and that's also the case in Europe, in South America, and in other parts of the world, as well. In terms of looking at what the next sort of 10 to 20 years could potentially hold, and how that could be sort of unlocked. I think for the longest while everyone has been looking at Africa as being the next big thing and the next big thing, and we've kind of been sort of waiting and waiting and waiting for it to happen. But when you look at what has happened, during the pandemic, and the rate of growth since the pandemic, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of industry development, I think there's been a marked change and an acceleration of different industries across Africa versus before COVID. Not sure why that's the case. Perhaps it was an opportunity to reset and to finally grow. But with that, I would also expect aviation to grow in the same way. And when I look at other geographies around the world, and again, I always sort of look to South Asia, where South Asia was growing nominally, and then all of a sudden, over a span of 2 decades, there was extreme exponential growth, led by a handful of airlines, but created significant capacity, significant levels of competition, high levels of democratization for travel. And I see, if policies were to be liberalized, open
Mm.
skies, free, free cross-border travel, um, the role of sovereign carriers that are supported by governments in terms of repurposing their airline, you know, to be the driver of economic growth for low cost and private carriers to focus on their segments of the business, whether it's whether it's in terms of commercial viability, they each have a role to play in the ecosystem to accelerate that growth over the next 10 to 20 years. And this is where I say if all the balls were to fall in the right hole at the right time, what we would see is what we have seen in other markets is this massive exponential growth. When will it happen?
Mm,
We all hope it happens soon, but there's a lot that needs to take place before we start to see that. And I think that our previous conversation that we had around open skies, liberalization, I mean, all of these things have a particular role to play in terms of, at least at a bare minimum, providing the platform. But then the infrastructure and that focus also needs to follow as well in order to see that through and to create a sustainable and viable aviation industry, which is competitive, but at the same time is made
mm,
up of a significant number of players that can actually coexist viably as well.
mm. Excellent. Now, the one thing that we have not touched on, but which I also think could be a drawback in Africans airlines benefiting from this, is the issue of cost. There are significant amounts of taxes, charges, and fees that are levied on the passenger ticket. And research indicates that on average, an average regional or intercontinental ticket has on it about $56 as the tax on average. Now, this is quite significant. In some cases, it's over $100 if you put all the taxes and charges together. Now, and considering that most of the people who would want to travel on the continent are not very wealthy, uh, affordability becomes important in actually driving the traffic. How can we shift from overtaxing the industry to supporting the industry to grow? What has happened in other markets?
It's a really good point, Raphael. And when you look at, it's almost a case of being penny wise, pound foolish, in the sense that from a government perspective, there is this guaranteed revenue stream by levying taxes on seats and at different parts of the supply chain, whether it's at the time of purchasing a ticket, whether it's the airport experience, or whatever that might actually be. But what we have been able to show through some of the work that Knighthood Global has done across Africa, and particularly working very closely with government, is by actually liberalizing some of those fees and charges and enabling, a cheaper pathway for people to travel. It actually provides far greater economic output than the taxes that they would have otherwise have collected, but by levying these, these charges as well. So I think part of it is, hey, are we actually comparing the right sets of data and making the right decisions? For first and foremost. And I think, look, the other piece is really this focus on, if the industry if there is a focus by governments to actually create competition, to have more people in the skies, to have better productivity, and to have that economic multiplier effect across other industries, then aviation really does need to be the focus from the perspective of making it affordable for the traveler as well, in order for them to see the payback in their other industries in terms of collection of, corporate taxes or whatever that might translate into. But there is a direct economic equation between liberalizing the red tape or the structure around what makes it cost prohibitive from a consumer perspective,
Mm,
versus the liberalization and the economic upside. But I think it's more than just what we've spoken about in terms of red tape. When we look at aviation inherently, fuel is purchased in USD, subject to market forces. Aircraft are leased or financed
mm,
in a foreign currency as well. So there are these other avenues of cost and challenges that also needs to be overcome as well. And we can certainly talk
mm.
a bit more about that and in terms of what that means, much more broadly and beyond just the red tape that we impose on ourselves.
Mm. Yeah. Vincent, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, Manish said it excellently. So we also seen that the economic impact of course, air traffic is much larger than the typically cost, even if you set up an airline, etc. So for tourism, of course, you can bring in much more tourism there, which has an impact then on hotels, industry, etc. So we also believe that the short-term view on only charging passengers, departing fees, etc may optimize the income for the governments on short term, but on the long run, I believe it would be more beneficial also to unlock aviation so that they can stimulate demand also in other industries and promote the country. And I bet if you are one of the countries in Africa who do it first, you can even have a competitive advantage to your neighbors. So, which we have seen maybe in other continents also, once government and the whole ecosystem are investing and supporting aviation industry, they have that's a huge impact on how the country is positioned on the continent, etc. So I believe this forced approach can really help here.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I just a reminder that let your questions come in. I have seen one question already, two of them actually. Please send in your questions and I would interrogate them shortly. But as we go on, both of you are consultants in this industry. You would realize that collaboration among African airlines, it's actually something very difficult. How can we get airlines to work much more closely together? Because there is so much benefit in working together in this industry than working separately. What can we do? Starting with Vincent.
Yeah, I agree that we see very little collaboration, and even if some CEOs announce it, we see then that it's not really implemented, or sometimes it fails. And I believe that's the best start would be to start with some administration or background functions. So if you start a collaboration on training, if you start collaborating on IT, if you start collaborating on maintenance, so something which is not maybe directly affecting the from the window like to the world, right? But more in the back office to collaborate. And then if you build up trust there on this back end, then start looking also at the commercial side, then you really have to align flights, etc. But I think that's more difficult. Maybe that affects more the broad or the pride of the nations. If you have to reduce flights, for example, or have to coordinate. But if you start from the back end, as I said, maybe it could help and be the first step, an easier step for them.
Yeah, thank you. Manish, what do you think? Collaboration.
Yeah, look, I agree with
Even
Vincent.
within the region where you are based, there are a number of airlines, but they don't seem to work as closely together as you would expect.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. So when I I'm based otherwise mostly in the UAE. I'm currently in Australia at the moment, but what I actually see in terms of industry collaboration, I mean you'd be surprised with the two major carriers in the UAE. There is actually a lot of collaboration that goes on. It may not be on the customer side because they're obviously competing for passenger seats, but as Vincent correctly identified in terms of there's a tremendous amount of operational synergies by way of, maintaining aircraft, by way of doing, pilot training or crew training and other things like that as well. So when you look at it in the context of Africa, each of these airlines don't have the balance sheet, the means, or the capabilities to be able to have their own entire infrastructure. And so therefore sharing of infrastructure and actually enabling one to have access to services and then the other one to be able to lower their cost by actually leveraging the infrastructure that they have with other airlines, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And I am actually starting to see some of those collaborations already start to take place. And I think that is the first pathway to collaboration. what I'm also seeing in Africa is also on the commercial side. I'm seeing more code shares and interlines taking place, more so in the last
Mm.
5 years than the previous 10 years. But it is happening, and I think Africa has already woken up and arrived at a destination where collaboration of sorts enables them to coexist in a particular market, whether they're trying to leverage each other's cost base, to support operations and the back office, as Vincent mentioned, or on the commercial side where, hey, not all airlines have access to an order book, and not all airlines have the financial means to actually grow organically and to induct more aircraft. And so therefore, the only other way that you could
Mhm.
grow or to enter other markets is through these meaningful interline and code share relationships, and whereby enabling capacity, growing distribution, and that's already happening today. And I think you'll see there'll be far more of that coming up as well, because it has been successful, at least in the last 5 years.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Now, let me go to the questions from our audience. And the first one, I think I'll put it through to Vincent. First question is from Aaron Monetsi, and he's saying, what is the significant difference in continental strategic focus between the EU and Africa as far as aviation is concerned?
I mean, the strategic goal, I think, between both continents is the same, right? SATAM has the same or vision kind of as Europe has. So the direction here is quite aligned, I would say. So I don't see there a huge difference. However, when it comes to the implementation, they are different stage, obviously. So still Africa rather fragmented, protectism. That's still something to work on, but I think that the strategic goal is quite similar.
Okay,
Is
strategic goal is
Yeah.
quite similar. Thank you. Now the second question also from Aaron is for Manish. And this is a more direct question. He says, would it be fair to say that the case for national carriers is all but over? Is there still a case for
Very.
national carriers, or we should leave it and move on?
So if I look globally, some of the best carriers in the world are national carriers. And I will mention names this time, outside of
Mm.
Africa. Singapore Airlines is a great example, albeit it is run in a very commercial way. It has a group structure holding, but ultimately it's owned by the Singapore government through an investment vehicle. You look at
Mm.
Etihad Airways, you look at Emirates, Qatar Airways, all national carriers backed by their sovereigns and are world-class, fantastic airlines, and also profitable as well. If structured right, can sovereign carriers across Africa continue to be strong, and continue to focus on economic development? Absolutely, yes. What is the definition of success? I think that's the debate that we really need to have, because one can say, hey, the
Mm.
definition of success is what is your reported profitability at the end of a financial year? How much cash flow have you generated? Or is the measure of success what has been my economic contribution to the nation, and how much industries have I opened up, and what has that meant for the wealth of the nation overall versus the profitability of a single entity? So I think we need to sort of have a context in terms of why do sovereign carriers exist, and what is the importance of
Mm.
their role versus a pure commercial airline, which is geared towards profitability because they have shareholders to be accountable for. In this case, the shareholders are the nation, other people. It's the development of the nation is very different from investors that are looking for a return.
Hello?
I am here.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you,
We can
Raphael.
hear
Hello?
you.
You can hear
Yes,
me?
yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, good, great, great. I thought I was losing I was losing you. Yeah. I thank you very much for that response. So basically, whether state-owned airlines or private airlines, it actually depends on what the end game is, the objective of the state is. If you think your objective is other things other than just the bottom line, then you can get into, you can still support a national airline because it has other roles that it supports and in the development, other than just leaving it.
But I
Thank you
think,
for that sector. Now
yeah,
let me get on to my next question, and this is now on management and stability. You know, the one thing that we're not very good at in Africa, I must admit, is actually keeping our top level management in place for longer. And this is not obviously good for continuity and implementation of the strategic vision and plans of the airlines. How can we begin to get airlines understand the importance of having stable management in place?
Yeah, I think it's always a balance, right, between stability and bringing fresh inputs, fresh new ideas to an airline. So, of course, you have to find the right balance. But I agree, if the fluctuation is too high at an airline, for example, then it could be very critical in terms of strategic consistency or lack of direction. And of what we observed sometimes in state-owned carriers, for example, they are also, it's not the airline which does not understand the importance of management, but it's rather than that they are state-owned company which has limited, for example, salary structures given as they are state-owned company, so they are not even able to pay more. So there's somehow the structure in which they are stuck. And so I would not say the airline is not aware of the importance, but yeah, they are simply not able often to do so, and then have to find different ways to compensate the top performers.
Oh, thank you. Manish, well, do you have anything to add to that? And also, how can we ensure that we have a pool of skilled leaders that, look, even if we lose some, we can always fill the gap effortlessly?
I think, look, from personal experience, working, worth both for, but also advising African carriers, there is a lot of talent. There are some really, really great people out there. Have they had the opportunity to shine? Not always, perhaps. And so I think it's a two-part question. One is, how do you nurture development, retain talent, and how does that talent does not escape Africa and end up elsewhere? And other places where I've worked and where I've advised, I've worked with some of the best aviation professionals from the African continent. And there's always been this sort of desire that, hey, I want to go back home because I'm proud of my country, I'm proud of my region, and I want to do something, for my country. Does the framework back home allow it, in order for them to come back with this wonderful international experience that was initially founded in Africa but taking it to the world and coming back? Perhaps not. Differential salary structures, expectations on span of role and governance. And so when you look at, say, for example, an executive leader that may operate, say, in the Middle East or Europe or North America, there's a level of empowerment, there's a span of control, there's the ability to be able to make decisions. And those
Mm.
those attributes, which is very important for a leader to be effective, may not necessarily be in place. And so whether it's a sovereign carrier, and so all of a sudden you've got this sort of overshadow of a government, because it's almost like it's a political appointment, and there's the shackles of also being, part of a government. And so therefore the way that the government is run is also the way that the airline is run as well, which is some of the challenges. And perhaps that's probably alluded to the person who asked the question earlier, that these are some of the challenges that we have as well, and that challenge directly impacts the way that we nurture, we foster development, the way that we manage our leaders as well, the empowerment, whether it's the empowerment of the CEO or the executive team, or whether it's for the heads of departments that are actually running each and every part of the airline as well. That's the challenge, and I think that's the inflection point that we, that African carriers and governments needs to solve for.
Thank you for that. Vincent, do you have something briefly to add on this?
I totally agree with Manish. I mean, I'm focused more on the salary structure initially, but of course, he's totally right that it's also about more what are my opportunities, how can I really act, what I am empowered to, or is it always the ministry I have to go to and ask for approval or guidance? And of course, if I feel very restricted as a talent, I might also think about moving on. So that's maybe also give them the freedom and empowerment to shine.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving on, look, in Africa, airlines largely operate the traditional legacy model, with the exception of a few airlines in Southern Africa and Kenya and probably some parts of North Africa. We have very few low-cost carriers and even fewer hybrid airlines. Now, do we think that the legacy module that is very predominant on the African continent is the best fit for the continent, or other models should actually be encouraged? Manish?
It's a super interesting question, and one which I've personally been at an inflection point on transformation of business models, etc. But when you look at the African diaspora, when you look at expectations, if if a person is paying a significant amount for a ticket, and obviously we've talked about the challenge of why and how ticket prices are very high, and also the way that they travel with a lot of luggage allowance, the expectation of space on an aircraft, and the expectation of services. There is this inherent cultural connotation of what service standards should be, and perhaps that has been historical because there has been very limited choice, to your point where you've identified that there's not that many, low cost carriers. But if you look at Europe and South Asia and North America, and if you look at what low-cost carriers and hybrid carriers have done to democratize the market and to give full-service carriers both a run for their money, but also an opportunity for them to course correct and to modify their business models, low-cost carriers certainly have a role to play. And certainly we spoke about democratization of travel and how do you get more people into the skies? How do you enable better connectivity? Historically, it's been the low-cost carriers that have created that democratization. And so I'm talking in the context of both domestic and intra-Africa travel, predominantly. Of course, given the geographical, positioning of most African nations, full service carriers and intercontinental carriers would continue to obviously serve and to play a role, particularly with intercontinental, connectivity. But there is space for that, democratization and other geographies that have reached that inflection point, whether it was a decade ago or whether it was 3 decades ago. We've seen what that has done to aviation. We've seen what that has done to market conditions, and we've seen the benefits of it today in terms of highly competitive markets and a coexistence of different business models servicing different segments of the market as well.
Mm. Thank you for that, Manish. Vincent, do you agree with Manish? And do you think that the models we have operating currently are much suitable?
I think they are suitable for the current situation, but as we discussed about the upcoming the hopefully upcoming liberalization, I believe, then to quote the questionnaire from before, I think the full service carriers are old, how was it, old but outdated? So I assume the winners of any liberalization ongoing won't be full service carriers, but more rather than hybrid carriers who really then can benefit from the hopefully lower charges, more stimulated demand, etc., which is only not triggered by then the airfares, but also then, as you said, visa, etc. So I believe if I would set up a new airline now on African continent and also expecting the ongoing liberalization, I wouldn't bet on full service carriers, but rather on a more hybrid carrier model, which has more flexible or lower cost structures and lower service levels here to really benefit from this.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, I want us to shift gears a bit and then look at, we talked about liberalization. Now, what should be the role of the various stakeholders in ensuring that this happens so quickly? So, for instance, what should governments be doing? What should our regulators be doing? What should airlines themselves actually focus on? So, starting with you, Manish, what should government's role be in actually ensuring speedier liberalization of the market?
So if we look at, I mean, and sort of taking a leaf out of Vincent's book and the comparison that Vincent made to Europe, in Europe you have the European Union, you have one economy, so to speak. You have one economic cooperation across all nations, and you have one set of rules and one set of governance, which governs aviation across an entire continent between borders as well. And so if you were to look at Africa as a North Star, first and foremost, there needs to be an assimilation of standards, of policies, of regulations, first and foremost. And then beyond that, the collaboration between the governments to enact on the ability to be able to liberalize and democratize travel through those policies. And that then further stems down into, say, for example, bilateral relationships. It stems to, so many things. I mean, Africa is unique in the sense it doesn't have a single currency like Europe. It is made up of many nations with many different, currencies as well. So working economically between different reserve banks on both foreign currency and acknowledging each other's currencies, these are basic things which basically, facilitate that liberalization or democratization of travel as well, given that Africa is not Europe. Europe is one economic unit. Africa is made up of many economic units and many currencies and many rules and regulations. And so that assimilation from that perspective, I think is foundational to creating more of a single market for and a free market for aviation across Africa.
Thank you. So, Vincent, what do you think? Do you sort of support the positions exhibited by Manish?
Yeah, I would support it totally. So that's especially applies, of course, for between nations or within Africa, but also looking maybe to your question, what shall governments do to support like the aviation in their country? And I think there, what we've seen also beyond Africa is with the whole ecosystem. So that's the government. The government typically owns then the airports, the ATC, the CAA, Civil Aviation Authorities, etc. So if they all are then instructed or geared toward one goal. We want to promote aviation in our country, to and from our country. And then it comes to air traffic rights, etc. So if this all is like a priority one to support aviation, that would be the key game changer, I think. So currently, if they would only support the airline, but I don't want to forget the airport, or then charge again high fees for air traffic control, this doesn't have. So best is always if they really want to have one common goal together, all in the aviation ecosystem, to make aviation work, and then they can grow, and then I bet all benefit, even if they have lower charges per passengers by growing passengers numbers. In the end, the absolute typical income is then higher. So
great. Thank you so much. Our time is up, but I have one more very interesting question that I would want us to take before I get your parting shots, your final word to my listening audience. So the question, I think I'm not too sure which of you would want to take this, but it's based in the Gulf and Southeast Asia. So probably, Manish, you might want to give it a shot. Jonathan Kisia wants to know how best can airlines from other regions, that is the Gulf and probably Southeast Asia, work with African airlines to maximize on the business opportunities?
If I look at Asian and Middle Eastern carriers, they already have a very significant footprint across Africa. If anything, I think they have already demonstrated both a track record by way of investment and economic, cooperation to bring access and connectivity into Africa as well. Qatar Airways being a classic example of actually investing in the African continent and taking minorities in, strategic investments across certain, African carriers as well. That, in my view, is something which is already happening today. Can that be potentially, improved? That is more of a commercial question, and perhaps that's sometimes a question between governments as well, in terms of, well, what is the broader agenda of, a sovereign carrier of one nation versus the sovereign carrier or the government of another nation, and what collaboration that they're looking to undertake as well. But that is already there and existing today. And we've been seeing more and more investments happening in that space. And the reason why we're seeing those investments is because there is a belief that there is growth, that there is potential, that there is additional market reach that actually exists in Africa. And it is both a commercial decision as much as it is a political decision between, two governments working together.
Thank you. Thank you. Whenever I can come to Vincent, now, if you have any comment on this, you can do so, but just add it to your final word on our discussions today.
Yeah, many thanks for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I would say Africa still has a huge potential to be unlocked. And especially there are good signs. I've been to several conferences so far where they always said, oh, we've been talking about the same stuff for years now. But I think that with the ongoing visa liberalizations ongoing, I would be more optimistic now compared to last conferences. So I would hope that in the next conference, we see more good news and more results.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Manish, your final word.
Absolutely. Well, Raphael, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this forum, and to share some of the insights and to hear from Vincent as well. There's certainly a lot of alignment in terms of how we think, in terms of both the challenges and the opportunities. I think for me, my parting words would be, when you look at Africa, don't look at Africa with frustration. Look at Africa with fascination, because there is a lot of potential, and all it takes is a village and a few villages to come together to create an aqueduct, and all of a sudden you have momentum in order to create change as well. There's a lot of challenges that needs to be resolved. It's not going to be solved overnight, but I'm already starting to see that the wheels are turning in a positive way. And it just requires momentum. It requires push. It requires people to have, belief in what they're doing, in order to both, grow and to flourish this industry that we all love very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. For me, my takeaway from Manish is, we look at Africa with fascination, not frustration. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we bring the curtains down on today's SkyConnect dialogue. And I want to, on behalf of everyone, thank Manish and Vincent for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us on this very important topic. And to our guests, we thank you all for always dialing in to participate in these discussions. I thank those who have asked questions, and we do appreciate your comments and contributions. Thank you very much, everyone, and we wish you a nice afternoon and all the best for the rest of the week. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.